I took the last drag of my cigarette and inhaled the deep breath, savoring the carcinogen-filled smoke inside my lungs before I drew it out again. I looked down at the smoldering butt in my hand and took a gander up at the green trees that surrounded my backyard. Modest, all-consuming green trees which everybody here claim are what make this little town so damn pleasant. More like smothering, if you ask me. I've always been more of a city boy myself, whereas most people around here find the streets of Los Angeles overbearing and nauseating. I'd gladly give up those pretty green trees for apartment buildings and taco stands. There's just something mysterious about the mountains, something lonely, something desolate. And every once in a while, things happen out there that just ain't right. Let me tell you a little something about where I used to live. Green Valley, it's called. And believe me, there is no false advertisement in the name. The little mountain town in the heart of Southern California is greener than an over-enthusiastic Irishman on St. Paddy's Day, and covered with a heavy layer of wild shrubs, foliage, and modest-sized trees. There are only 2 real streets in town. By real, I mean frequently traveled on by the town's residents and commuters. First, there's San Francisco Canyon Road, which weaves down through the mountains for about 20 miles and puts you right at the edge of Valencia. Then there's Spunky Canyon Road, which most of the other streets in the town branch off as it connects up the neighborhoods. Commuters traveling between the Antelope Valley and the Santa Clarita Highway drive up and down San Francisco Canyon every day, which also provides a quick way for families and teenagers to get to Magic Mountain from Palmdale or Lancaster, if they don't feel like taking the freeway. Given its heavy traffic at times, winding curves, razor-sharp corners, and drivers who fly down the damn thing like they're practicing for the Daytona 500, it's seen its fair share of accidents over the years. Now, one thing I always found quite interesting is that, years ago, someone thought it would be a good idea to have a loud, booming alarm system set up in the Green Valley Fire Station that alerts the locals when there's an accident in the canyon. Given that there is no cell phone reception anywhere, the alarm provides a means of communication to the residents when San Fran is blocked off due to a car crash. It's not a bad idea, and I never would have had a problem with it. Except, there is just something really off-putting about this alarm. I always thought it sounded like the type you would hear at a government facility when they've discovered that a nuclear bomb is about to be dropped and blow the whole country to smithereens, or that some deadly flesh-eating virus has escaped from a library and is quickly seeping into the air of our neighborhoods. And those aren't the loveliest thoughts when you're laying in bed at 10 at night in your underwear, and you hear this loud, belligerent siren suddenly rattle through the streets and penetrate you to the very core. It's just disturbing. But anyways, that's not too important at the moment. What's important is that on this day, on this evening, I had just smoked my last cigarette down to the filter, and I was in dire need of more to carry my nicotine fix throughout the night. This meant that I had to make a little run to the gas station on the corner of Spunky and San Fran, where the canyon meets the main residential area of the town. I had just disposed of the cigarette butt in the trash can, and was walking my way to the front door when I heard the alarm pierce through my ears. It stopped me in my tracks. That familiar, low yell of the siren rang in my head, and I instantly felt a wave of compassion for the sorry saps who had just crashed their car in the canyon. I had hoped it wasn't as bad as the one I saw a few months ago on my way home from work, in which a small sedan going about 90 miles per hour had a head-on with an SUV about 30 feet behind me, while I watched the carnage from the rearview mirror of my truck. Poor bastards, I said out loud as I continued my strut inside to grab the truck keys. Then something struck me and I paused, mouth agape and listening attentively. There's something slightly off about this one. Now, I couldn't really tell for sure, but it didn't seem to be coming from the fire station. It was too distant. And what's even stranger is that there was this unsteadiness to it. It was dying down a little and then coming on strong again in waves and changing in pitch as well. The dynamics were totally off. It had a beckoning, sorrowful longing to it, like a wild animal with its leg caught in a hunter's trap. I wasn't just hearing it. I was feeling it too. My insides felt like they were being grabbed and pulled towards my legs like silly putty. I was getting more uneasy by the second. Of course it was weird, I thought. But I had other, more pressing priorities at hand than sitting around pondering the sound of this alarm. My nicotine craving struck again, and I was suddenly in the truck cruising down the road towards the corner store to get those sweet, sweet Newport menthol smokes. I turned on my headlights as I navigated the small stretch of asphalt that leads to the gas station about a mile from my cozy little two-bedroom house. It was summertime, and the clock on the dash told me it was 8:30 p.m. Now, summer days are pretty long out here, and the sky was at that stage right between dusk and twilight, where everything I passed had a subdued glow to it. The road was not yet a complete mass of darkness without my headlights, but it was close. I saw silhouettes of bushes, hypnotically flailing side to side in the distance as I approached the gas station. When I pulled in, the thought gradually crept into my mind over the next few seconds. Then I was staring at an empty establishment. There were no cars at the pumps, or even the familiar employee trucks in the parking lot. It wasn't that business was slow or anything. The place was totally abandoned. Where the hell was everybody? I thought as my eyes caught the dim open sign in the window, whose lights were not flashing in their usual neon red. This place is closed? It's the one night the bastards decide to close early, and I happen to have just burned my last cigarette of the carton. Damn, just my luck. I pulled up in the parking lot and parked my truck so that I could think about my next move. I saw the metal gate behind the big double doors, then looked over to the empty chairs still lingering out front, where Frank and Tom shoot the shit every day on their cigarette breaks. Now call me what you will, but I was not about to go the whole night without that sweet taste of tobacco. So I walked over to the two chairs in hopes that Frank, or Tom, had left some butts for me to scrounge up and hold me over until morning. And lo and behold, I was in luck. They had left their ashtray right between the chairs, and there was even a half-smoked stogie still burning, emitting broken coils of smoke like tiny ghosts dancing in the moonlight. I must have just missed them. I gained some amusement at the thought of them on their first break tomorrow trying to figure out how in the hell 30 cigarette butts apparently just jumped up and disappeared from the tray. Then I remember that Frank still hasn't returned my power drill I let him borrow 2.5 weeks ago. Just for the afternoon, he had told me. And my amusement turned to out-loud laughter. Let that bastard think it over. Frank was a good guy, but he had a reputation of holding on to other people's things for a little longer than he should. I turned and walked back to the truck a little shamefully, feeling like a grimy cigarette butt scrounging bum, and gazed at the canyon road. Not a single damn car. Now that accident must have been pretty bad to block the whole road like that. There wasn't a single vehicle driving the streets. I looked back at the two chairs, then to the road again, and that's when I first noticed the feeling. Something just wasn't right about all of this. See, in my 2 years of living in this little hole in the mountains, I had never seen the corner store close early. And given that Frank or Tom's cigarette was still lit in the tray, they must have rushed out of here in a real hurry. Feelings aside, the day had been uneventful up until this point, and I was bent on knowing what the hell was going on. So I decided to take a little drive down the canyon a little ways and see if I could take a peek at the accident. It sounds morbid, yeah, I know. And the last thing I wanted to do was get in the way of an ambulance or a cop if someone was seriously hurt, but I was putting it together in my mind and figured the emptiness of the gas station and the alarm going off may be connected in some way. Plus, the dull day had stirred up a sense of adventure in me that was not subsiding. And so, I lit a reburn and I took off down the road. Danger is at the heart of adventure. Now, I was just about to give up and head back when I saw it. It was dark now. A tiny little light was shining a ways down the canyon on what appeared to be the side of the road. There were still no damn cars, which had begun to give me a slight case of the jitters and the creeps all at once that manifested into my hands, which were now slightly tremoring as I gripped the wheel of my Ford with white knuckles. My mouth was drier than a barrel of hay. A wave of panic shot through me as I started to worry I might actually be having a mild seizure. A ridiculous notion. I'd never had one before, and I was pretty sure the symptoms didn't match up even in the slightest. I pushed the thought to the back of my mind and continued accelerating towards the glowing anomaly down the way, which was approaching faster than I had anticipated, swerving and slowing to accommodate the sharp bends in the now dark mountain road. I thought for sure I would have seen somebody by now, but there was nothing. No ambulances, no cop cars, no angry commuters coming up through the road, speeding and pissed off or getting held up by a crash on their way home from work. It was beyond strange for this usually bustling canyon, and my better judgment was telling me just go home to my bloodhound who was waiting for his 2 scoops of doggy chow, and forget about all this damn excursion. But I just couldn't. When I set my mind to something, I follow through and have a mighty hard time dismissing it. And so, as stubborn as I could allow myself to be, I pressed on, and in God's name and all the creatures in the world, do I wish now that I hadn't. The small light was becoming ever more apparent as I approached it slowly on my right side. There was something so mesmerizing about it, yet sinister, like a shimmering lighthouse guiding lost ships home towards some hidden rocky shore. I was a defenseless fly drifting closer and closer to a fluorescent bug zapper, right before he gets torched and turned into 1,000 specks of ash blown away by the steady, warm summer wind. I began to make out the shape of the car in the darkness. That's what it was, all right. It was a car, with the interior lights still on and the driver's side doors swung wide open. I pulled up in front of it on the side of the road with my headlights glaring down, turned the ignition, removed the key, and I sat in the deep silence. Silence which, after a moment, was broken by the sound of an owl emitting a large hoot in the trees somewhere. My mind raced as a million thoughts rushed through me at once, the most prominent one being that this must be the car that triggered the accident alarm earlier, and it had been some kind of wreck. But if that were the case, then where the hell were all the ambulances and the cop cars that I had nervously expected, and the crowd of people that usually linger around an accident to gossip and make sure everything's alright? There's no way they kept driving by this peculiar-looking scene without offering some kind of help. People have their downfalls, but they're nonetheless eager to help out their fellow man when in dire straits. We're a curious breed, no doubt curious, which is what left me so baffled as I stared out my windshield. It's coming. My personal curiosity was at an all-time high as I stepped out of the truck and approached the car. I left the headlights on to provide me with some illumination. It appeared to be in decent shape until I circled around to the driver's side. There was a monstrous-sized dent in the door that stretched all the way to the front fender. The window was smashed out, with no glass on the ground as far as I could see, and no driver anywhere to be found. It was a puzzling scene. I stepped back to observe the damaged vehicle a little better, and that's when it hit me again. The feeling. But it came on stronger now and I began to tremble harder. I shouldn't be here. Something was horribly wrong, and I knew it. And not just in a someone got hurt kind of way, no, this was different. I even felt it in the air. There was an oppressive musk that weighed on me, making me feel like my legs would give out at the slightest movement. I looked up at the trees. Even they were different. They appeared to be cowering away from this wrecked hunk of metal that sat in front of me, as if they themselves were terrified of this intruder in their quiet little home. This has got to be my imagination, I thought. I felt like I was trapped in some dreamlike landscape, and any moment I was going to wake up in my bed submerged in a pool of sweat. No, not a dream. A goddamn nightmare. Where the hell is the driver? I couldn't help but wonder. I leaned against the side of the car with the door still open and began to rationalize the best I could. As I looked down, thoughts moving and circling my mind, something caught my eye. There was a little trickle of blood in the dirt by my right foot. I looked up further, and there was more blood, and then more. It was a trail leading away from the car, so I followed it with my eyes until it was out of the car's light's reach and taken out of sight by the night. A chilling realization crept into my mind. Whoever was driving the car had gotten out and ran into the forest. And the next thing I knew, I was grabbing the flashlight from my center console and aiming its beam at the blood trail leading from the side of the road into the trees. Whoever it was that had been in this vehicle was badly hurt. I walked a little to get a better view and saw a break where a small beaten path was winding up through the trees and into the mountain. That must be where he ran off to. The question that had dominantly plagued my mind since the gas station had become secondary was when I realized this person is probably in need of some serious help. I was getting a hold of myself a little better now, and that rational part of my brain that had been temporarily hijacked was starting to make its way back. Even so, the mixed emotions I had at that moment could have torn me in two. But I knew deep down that if there was someone dying out there, and I had to hear later on in the evening news that this person had bled out in the mountains of my little town, I would have never forgiven myself. But arguing with that other half of me had suddenly become fruitless. Now was the time to act. Even though every bone in my body was telling me to just go back home and call 911. Or maybe wait here for a moment for the ambulances that would eventually arrive. I didn't. Flashlight in hand, I headed up that trail. I immediately saw more blood as I did. The beam from the flashlight illuminated the way as I stepped over fallen dead branches and leaves. The drops weren't huge, but they were enough to know that whoever was bleeding had taken a serious injury back in the car and was still out there, cut to all hell. I entertained the thought at this point of at least turning around and snatching my .45 pistol from my house and rushing back here as quickly, just in case I run into some kind of trouble up there. But I was too far, and I didn't want to risk getting to the victim after it was too late. I had remembered reading somewhere in a magazine or a journal that a person will die when they have lost 40 to 60% of their blood in their body, and by the looks of it, my missing person was getting there, fast. I stared at the quarter-moon sky, which hadn't been providing me with jack shit as far as light goes, then back down again and continued on. The drops began to get bigger as I progressed up that trail, and I paused to take a look at a peculiar-looking one that seemed to have a chunk of something white and slimy stuck to it. After a good few minutes of brisk walking, I noticed that they weren't only getting bigger now, but also thicker and more pronounced. I was reminded of my own mortality as I followed these crimson puddles of dense fluid that leaked out of this broken human being and sat, coagulating and festering in the cold earth. Or maybe out of something else. See, it's easy to forget how fragile our bodies really are when you've never really had an accident. The blood drops veered off the trail, and I caught one with my flashlight on a branch about as high as my head. And then I heard something. See, I couldn't quite make it out, but it sounded like the low chatter of someone's voice. I looked through the trees where the blood on the high branch was dripping from, and I could vaguely see an area that had been trampled through. The voice definitely came from that direction. I climbed in through a small opening the size of a crouched man and began to cautiously follow this trampled wonder through the trees. My senses were wild, heightened to the point of animalistic intensity in the cool darkness. I saw more blood on the branches and then stepped in a small pool of it. I then shined the flashlight down and observed more of that white, slimy crap that I saw earlier. It looked gut-wrenching. If I had stared any longer, I would have been at risk of losing my dinner. I felt stomach acid rise in my esophagus and slowly make its way back down again. What the hell is that? I thought to myself as I crouched to get a better look of the shimmering white pieces against their dark, scarlet background. They looked something like chunks of peeled grapes. If peeled grapes were white. My concentration was interrupted when the chatter started again. Only this time, it was much closer and almost directly in front of me. It sounded like someone mumbling to themselves, and I knew it had to be my man. Or woman, although I thought this was unlikely by now. I flared with bursts of excitement as I headed closer to the sound, rushing through the tree branches and low bushes as I continued on the trail. They were cutting me up something fierce, but I didn't care because at that moment I saw an opening amidst the branches. I made my way through it and fell to my knees with a hard thud as I tripped over a stray branch that caught my shoe just right. Sharp needles dug into my palms as I hit the ground. The flashlight slipped and launched a good couple feet away from me during the fall. I winced a little and returned to my feet, brushing the leaves and dirt off my clothes. It was at this point that the environment had my full visual attention as I studied my surroundings with a deep, penetrating gaze, and my mouth suddenly dropped. I was in a clearing. At least, it appeared to be a clearing until I shined the flashlight down to my feet. My eyes accompanied my mouth and grew from astonishment. I'd been walking on top of smashed bushes. All around me, in almost a perfect circle 20 feet in diameter, these bushes had been collapsed and laid down to create a perfect surface to walk on. It was utterly bewildering. I shined the light around some more with my continual continence of pure awe, which was now permanently attached. Someone must have made this. This doesn't just happen in the middle of a group of trees, I thought. Every bush had been pressed in exactly the same fashion as the next, and snapped at the same height to create this perfect platform of shrubs. Now I barely had time to wonder when I heard it. That mumbling again. It startled me this time. A shudder went through me like a bolt of lightning, and I frantically pointed the flashlight in the direction of the noise. The blood drained from my face and I went completely cold. By the edge of this platform, on the opposite side of where I was standing, there stood someone with their back towards me. It was indeed a man. He was wearing a collared shirt with the sleeves rolled up and black slacks. His arms were at his sides, and I saw a trickle of blood running down his right one. His head was face downwards, and he remained perfectly still, like a statue. "Sir?" I called out. "Sir, you alright?" No response. "Hey, I saw your car down there. Were you in an accident? You hurt?" Still no response. I did nothing for a moment. You see, I just stared at him waiting for some kind of communication, but I got none. Then it hit me again, hard. There was a pressure that rushed inside my head which felt like a million bees swirling around my brain. It was pressing on my shoulder blades, weighing me down almost to the point of collapse. Every part of me was screaming, pleading to get out of there. I was a hair away from bolting the other direction as fast as I could to my truck. Go. Run. What the hell am I doing here? The thought returned. I took another look at him. It was all wrong, just plain wrong, but I had to hold on a little longer. Now was not the time for another internal argument. I brushed it off the best I could and began to walk forward towards him slowly, eyeing his frozen limbs with great caution. I heard the branches crunch beneath my feet. I'm bleeding," he spoke. His voice was calm, soft, but with a hint of something else. I'd never heard anything like it. "Yeah, you are. Looks like you're hurting pretty bad, too. Why don't you let me walk you down to my truck? It's just down the road. We gotta get you to the hospital, man." I pleaded with the man for any excuse to get away from this creep show. "They got me." "Oh yeah? Who got you? Is that why you're bleeding? Did someone attack you?" My voice was quivering and I was shaking all over. I could barely articulate my words. "They think they can have this place, but... He was heaving in deep breaths. "But they're wrong. This one's mine." His voice deepened to something atrocious as he yelled. The voice of his scream flung me backwards and I fell on my ass, dropping the flashlight. I got to my knees and began to fumble around like a frantic lunatic in hopes of recovering it. The bleeding man turned around slowly, walked closer to me, and leaned down a bit. I curled my fingers around, and immediately shined the flashlight in his face, all in one fluid motion. I surprised myself with how fast my movements were, which gave me a small sense of control amidst the chaos. And then as quickly as it came, the brief joy I had felt had fled. What I saw paralyzed me to the spot. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. There was a handle of a small knife sticking out of his eye socket, which had been lodged into his head through his left eyeball. There were slimy chunks of white stuck to his cheek. He was peering at me through his one good eye, and I was trying so hard to keep my thoughts together, which had now become a jumbled blur. I was floating in the night sky. There is no way he could still be alive after a wound like that. The blade must be halfway through his brain, I thought. He gazed at me for a split second, and with a raspy, low voice, he leaned in closer and lividly shrieked, "You're all going to die." And just then, his head started jerking in short, rapid movements from side to side, impossibly fast. An inaudible gibberish began to come from his mouth, which sounded like the mumbling I had heard earlier. In between a burst of jerks, he grinned forcefully to reveal a repulsive set of rotten teeth. His eye rolled back and his head was moving faster. The incoherent mumbling got louder and louder, and before I knew it, my paralysis subsided, and I was on my feet sprinting as fast as I could move while taking in heavy, deep breaths. I got back to the trail at lightning speed and took one look back to see if he was behind me. What I saw then, I'll never forget. A beam of light appeared out of thin air and began to consume his body as he continued to go through his bizarre, terrifying episode. He sucked his legs in first. They disappeared, and he began to lower his arms into it. Half of his torso and head were still sticking out while convulsing and spewing his incoherent babble. He roared and exhaled a stream of green vomit, which flung around him in a circle as his head was spinning, and splattered on to the collapsed bushes. I couldn't stop to watch any longer. I booked it as fast as my legs would go. Down the trail to the side of the road I went until I saw my headlights. I jumped into my truck, fumbled with putting the key in the ignition, heard the roar of those sweet 6 cylinders, jerked it into gear, and with dirt roosting from my tires, I was out of there. It's all over. The next morning I took a little trip to the gas station. Frank was out front in his usual smoking chair, puffing on a Marlboro Red. He moved his gaze from the cement walkway as I saw the logo of his faded trucker hat, with the 2 crisscrossed assault rifles ironed on the front. He jerked up towards me. He squirmed in his seat a little bit as I approached, then forced a stupid smile. I parked my feet directly in front of him and stared into his aging, wrinkled face. Now I should have expected his loud mouth to start gabbing before I could get a word in, but somehow it still surprised and irritated me. "Billy, how you doing, brother?" His mouth moved as anxiously as he did in that aluminum chair he probably took from an outdoor furniture set. "Hey, listen, I'm gonna need that drill for a little bit longer. You see, me and the wife are fixing up the barn, and I thought I'd put some more shelves in. Say, what do you think you make of all this? You see, I could have sworn there were a whole mess of cigarette butts in this ash." "Where the hell were you last night?" I interrupted him. I was in no mood for his rambling now, not today. "Whoa, what are you talking about?" he said, perturbed by my interruption. "Last night. Why did you close up the store so damn early?" "Oh, well, some funny things was happening. Me and Tom thought it was best just to call it quits for the night." He looked troubled when he spoke, with a slight wave of bewilderment and irritation, like I was trying to force some taboo topic from his mouth that he had thought he'd never have to actually bring up in conversation. "Funny things?" I said. I was all nerves. "Well, yeah, you can see the power went out in the whole place about 8:15. I couldn't see a damn thing. I have no idea why either. Tom checked all the breakers and they seemed to be in order." "So why didn't you just pull out the generator?" I said. "People need their gas and smokes." My mind was running, and I was caressing the corner of my flannel shirt between my thumb and forefinger. He could tell things weren't well in Billytown. My face was ghostly pale, and I knew from the glimpse I had caught of myself in the bathroom mirror before heading out, and the black circles were starting to form under my eyes from the restless 45 minutes of sleep I had just gotten. "Well, that's just it," he said. "Hadn't been a car come up that road for nearly an hour. Usually that time of night is busier than hell with all the folks commuting from work and whatnot. I met his stare while still caressing my shirt. Why, you feeling alright, Billy? You ain't looking your freshest this morning, he said, sounding genuinely concerned. Well, looks like you had a meeting with the devil himself. He followed his words with a nervous chuckle, but didn't take his eyes off of me. My heart began to jump a little and I felt the shakes coming on. I'm fine. You know what? Never mind. I'm gonna go grab a pack of smokes. I suddenly realized that I wasn't in the mood for all of this. Well now, hold on, Billy. There's something else too if you really want to know, he said as he grabbed a hold of my arm during my attempt to escape. Oh yeah, something else? I managed to sound a little bit more enthused. Nah, forget it, he said. Frank, what are you talking about? I had to know. Whatever it was, it couldn't do much more damage to my already fractured state of mind this morning. He eyed me up and down with a look on his face that said, you know what, kid? Fuck it. Just go grab your cigarettes. I don't think you can handle what I have to say, considering you look like you're gonna go running behind those bushes like a scared puppy dog if so much as a loud car drives by. But after a long while, he came out with it, and when he was finished, the comfort of those bushes didn't sound like a bad idea. Well, me and Tom just had this funny feeling, he began. You know how sometimes you just get a feeling, Billy? Like, when you know something ain't right? It was just this funny feeling that me and Tom both kept getting like... Like what? I asked, already knowing the answer. We couldn't tell you, really. And looking back on it, sounds kind of ridiculous now, but, well, it was like we shouldn't just be there. I gazed at him, flabbergasted. I couldn't believe it. It didn't have something to do with that alarm going off, did it? I asked with a hint of hopefulness in my voice. Alarm? What alarm? Hasn't been an accident in the canyon for nearly 3 weeks. Now, I moved to Los Angeles 6 months after the whole thing, and I quit smoking. After my conversation with Fred, I bought my cigarettes in a dazed panic and rushed back to the safety of my home, where I locked all the doors and windows, drew the curtains, and dozed off into a few hours of dreamless sleep. I had anxiety issues for the first few weeks and had to take some time off of work. About 5 days into my vacation, a Jehovah's Witness came to the door, and I nearly had a heart attack. I guess they got the idea to start soliciting to the smaller towns in Los Angeles County, which I could safely say they won't be doing again. Well, at least the kid who came to my door won't be. I'm sure he'll go door knocking in a more populated area from now on, considering how fast he booked it out of here when he heard the cock of my 12-gauge shotgun, letting him know I'm not in the business to be opening my door to strangers. The poor bastard made it to the end of my driveway in about 2 seconds flat. You see, I just kept thinking that anybody and everybody was that thing in disguise. I turned my phone off and permanently moved my shotgun to the nook by the front door, as well as keeping my pistol tucked into my pants while I pranced nervously around the house, checking the windows every 5 minutes. It sounds stupid now, but I thought for sure it was going to come looking for me, and I sure as hell wasn't going to take any chances. Now, after about a month, I realized I was turning into a paranoid, reclusive wreck, and I hated myself for it, so I decided to face my fear and take a drive down the canyon to that little spot where I had seen the car. I parked the truck near it and got out to gather whatever information I could find. I wasn't just facing my fears, I was looking for answers, and by God did I have a lot of questions. Some tire tracks were vaguely visible in the dirt where my original meeting with the car had been, but there's no way they could have belonged to my truck or the busted up sedan. Our tracks were long gone by then, blown away in the summer's wind. The blood was gone too. I took a walk up the trail again, retracing my steps from that night. I never found the bush platform or the opening in the trees, or the man anywhere. It's like he was never even there. That's not to say it didn't happen. I know what I saw. There was something on the road that night. I knew it, and everybody else knew it. And that's why there wasn't any cars, because just like Frank, the people who usually travel that road had enough sense to stay away from it and take the freeway home. Some call it intuition. You see, we all have those built-in alarms that draw us towards great and beautiful things, as well as steer us clear from danger. They knew there was something evil in that canyon, some abomination. And that's what it was. An abomination. What I think is that thing was calling someone or something that night to take it back home because it knew it had been bested. And God knows why, but for some reason, I was susceptible to its call. I chose to ignore my instincts, and it almost cost me my life. Anyways, I can't do anything about it now but carry on living and learn from my mistakes. I have no reason to fear it, for I know it's gone far away from here. But you know, sometimes on the darkest of nights, as I stare out my third-floor apartment window at the late-night city traffic, I get this funny feeling that it won't be gone for long. And you know what? If it does happen to return and our paths do happen to cross again, I'll be ready. And this time, I won't choose to ignore my inner alarms.